I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hillstring Gang or Angola 3. I'm here for life, I'm here to die. Inside these walls, inside the wire. And when the wolf cries, I know it's over. Oh, bloody Angola. Oh, bloody Angola.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, the complete story of America's bloodiest prison. I'm Jim Chapman, and a lot has happened since the last time I dropped an episode. Just last week, if you've been listening, we just completed a 3-part series in which I covered the crimes and convictions of 3 inmates that have received death warrants in the state of Louisiana. And the first episode in that 3-part series covered the crimes of Jessie Hoffman, who, if you'll remember, had his execution delayed due to a Louisiana district judge finding the method of execution, nitrogen hypoxia, unconstitutional and a violation of the 8th Amendment, which is cruel and unusual punishment. Now, this was on March 11th. So on March 12th, AG Liz Murrill, she files what is known as an emergency brief, and she urges the courts to move forward. Now, what really spearheaded this, at least from the defense standpoint, was the claim that the state did not release their execution protocol until the eve of May 7th. So essentially, they're saying they didn't have time to legally scrutinize that protocol. So let's go over Louisiana's execution protocol quickly. So the protocol outlines a structured multi-phase process, and it begins 30 days before the execution and continues until after the inmate is pronounced dead. In phase 1, which is 30 days before the execution, the inmate is served a death warrant, and he must acknowledge, or she must acknowledge, receipt of that death warrant. The inmate may select a spiritual advisor who must undergo training if they wish to be present in the execution chamber. Medical monitoring begins, and that includes mental health evaluations. All that is in phase 1, which is 30 days out. Then in phase 2, which is 2 weeks out, 14 days, the inmate's family receives formal notice of the execution date. The inmate also finalizes any legal, spiritual, or funeral arrangements. Then they move on to phase 3, which is 10 to 3 days before the execution. Law enforcement agencies, they get notified of the execution. Witnesses, including victim representatives and media, are selected. Final equipment inspections and security briefings are conducted. And then they move to phase 4, which is 12 to 36 hours before the execution. At that time, the execution chamber is placed on what's known as restricted access. The nitrogen hypoxia system gets tested to make sure it's functional. The inmate's personal property is inventoried and secured. And then phase 5 is the day of the execution. At noon, the inmate is served a final meal if he or she so chooses. 1 hour before the execution, final security checks are conducted. The inmate gets prepared, including being fitted with what's known as a pulse oximeter. The nitrogen hypoxia mask is placed into the execution chamber. And then the execution commences. The warden opens the nitrogen gas lockout valve. The gas is administered for at least 15 minutes or until 5 minutes after a flat line is detected on an EKG machine. The chamber is ventilated before officials confirm the execution is complete. And then there's a phase 6, which is post-execution procedures, which the coroner officially pronounces the inmate dead. The governor's office is notified and the body is removed. Funeral arrangements are carried out per the inmate's request. So that is the official execution protocol for the state of Louisiana. And that's what they were arguing. They didn't have this protocol, so they couldn't legally scrutinize it. I mean, they're buying time, right? So as I told you, Liz Murrill files what's known as an emergency brief. And at that point, the Louisiana appeals to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal, and they actually overturn the temporary injunction on Jessie Hoffman's execution. The execution was on, and it happened in quick order, but not before the justice system got quite the workout. First, after exhausting all other avenues, Hoffman appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court in the 11th hour. He filed both a writ and an application for stay of execution, and I have that, and I'm going to review it with you real quick. Jessie Hoffman's execution is scheduled for March 18th, 2025 between 6 and 9 p.m. To the Honorable Samuel Alito, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States and Circuit Justice for the Fifth Circuit. Petitioner Jessie Hoffman respectively requests that this court stay his execution using nitrogen hypoxia, pending the court's disposition of his pending petition of a writ. Mr. Hoffman is scheduled to be executed on March 18, 2025 between 6 and 9 p.m. If the court is unable to resolve this application by 5:59 on March 18, 2025, it should grant a temporary stay while it considers the application. Then it lists the reasoning for granting the stay of application. Mr. Hoffman's execution date is presently March 18, 2025. Mr. Hoffman has concurrently filed a petition for a writ with this application. The impending execution date may preclude this court from considering Mr. Hoffman's petition before the scheduled execution, thus necessitating this application. Mr. Hoffman's challenge to his execution is timely raised and has a very strong likelihood of success on the merits. The state of Louisiana announced on February 10th, 2025, that it had created a protocol for execution by nitrogen hypoxia. That is, the deprivation of oxygen through the forced inhalation of pure nitrogen until someone dies. It served Mr. Hoffman with a death warrant on February 20th, 2025, notifying him for the first time that he would be the first Louisiana inmate to be executed by nitrogen hypoxia. On March 18, 2025, the state did not disclose its new protocol for nitrogen gassing until over a week later. Mr. Hoffman, a practicing Buddhist, diligently exhausted his administrative remedies and filed this suit less than a week after receiving his death warrant, challenging the state's method of execution under the Eighth Amendment and the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. The Eighth Amendment forbids forms of execution that intensify a death sentence with super additions of terror, pain, or disgrace. To succeed on the method of execution challenge under the Eighth Amendment, an inmate must show that a feasible, readily implemented alternative procedure would significantly reduce a substantial risk of severe pain. The district court, after expedited discovery and a 12-hour hearing, concluded that Mr. Hoffman was likely to succeed on the merits of his Eighth Amendment claim and had entered a preliminary injunction based on its extensive findings of fact, which in turn were based on an expert and testimony. Relying on medical expert testimony, the district court concluded that Mr. Hoffman was likely to succeed in showing that nitrogen gassing super adds physiological terror compared to execution by a firing squad. And then in parentheses it says the readily available and feasible alternative Mr. Hoffman proposed. Number 2, he would likely be harmed absent a preliminary injunction. And 3, the equities and the public interest weighed against the state's rushed execution of Mr. Hoffman. A divided panel of the Fifth Circuit vacated the injunction on March 14, 2025, in an opinion flatly inconsistent with this court's precedent. As Mr. Hoffman explains in his petition, a majority of the Fifth Circuit panel misapplied the Eighth Amendment and ignored the district court's factual findings on the central issue of psychological terror. The majority suggested a categorical rule that the Eighth Amendment requires a petitioner to show that the alternative method of execution is less physically painful than the chosen method, regardless of the psychological effect, while giving lip service to the court's recognition to the superaddition of terror that it can violate the Eighth Amendment. The panel majority also completely ignored Mr. Hoffman's RLU-IPA claim, pressed by Mr. Hoffman as an alternative basis for affirming the court's injunction. Nitrogen hypoxia makes Mr. Hoffman's religious practice impossible. And then it goes on and it gives a conglomerate of reasons that Mr. Hoffman's attorneys felt the Fifth Circuit failed them, for lack of a better word. So after that was filed, the state responded, and that's known as a brief in opposition to the application for stay. And in that statement of the opposition of application, the state said, in the interest of time and efficiency, the state here addresses only the core relevant facts and it expounds where necessary in the argument below. On the night before Thanksgiving, 1996, plaintiff Jessie Hoffman kidnapped, robbed, and raped Mary Molly Elliott. The plaintiff kidnapped Molly at gunpoint, drove her to an ATM, forced her to withdraw $200, and robbed her. The plaintiff subsequently raped Molly in the back seat of her own car in the remote area of St. Tammany Parish. He then marched her, still naked, down a dirt path which was overgrown with vegetation and full of trash used as a dump. Her death march ultimately ended at a small makeshift dock on the Middle Pearl River, where the plaintiff was forced to her knees and he shot her in the head execution style. Molly likely survived for a few minutes after being shot, but she was not discovered until after Thanksgiving Day when a duck hunter came across her naked body on the dock. For his part, the plaintiff soon after took his girlfriend shopping with Molly's money. A jury convicted the plaintiff of first-degree murder and he was sentenced to death. His appeal was litigated to finality, and he exhausted all of his state and federal post-conviction remedies. Although lethal injection was Louisiana's method of execution when the plaintiff murdered Molly, drug companies have since made it extraordinarily difficult for states to obtain the necessary drugs. As a result, Louisiana and other states recently have turned to nitrogen hypoxia because there's no supply concerns with the nitrogen. For Louisiana, that time came in spring of 2024 when legislatures amended and adopted nitrogen hypoxia as a method of execution. Nitrogen hypoxia is Louisiana's only current available method. Over the past year, Louisiana's Department of Public Safety and Corrections constructed a nitrogen hypoxia system that mirrors Alabama. And since 2024, Alabama itself has carried out successfully 4 nitrogen hypoxia executions. In general terms, the system delivers pure nitrogen to a full-face silicone mask with a plexiglass screen known as a source respirator. Industrial grade and superior to medical grade mask. Thick cushion material presses against the face and creates an airtight seal. The mask has a one-way inlet valve, allowing for airflow into the mask from the industrial tube that delivers both ambient air and nitrogen. The mask also allows for exhaling through another one-way exhaust valve. The plaintiff appeared to complain the system uses industrial grade, not medical grade nitrogen. He omits that medical grade nitrogen is comparatively inferior because it has more impurities than does Louisiana's ultra grade nitrogen. The state's expert is the only expert in the case who inspected and tested Louisiana's system. Specifically, he laid down on the gurney with the mask on at the intended flow rate, and he testified that he could breathe very comfortably with the mask on. He also took a video demonstrating how quickly pure nitrogen displaces oxygen in the mask. By 30 seconds, the air inside the mask is only 4.4% oxygen, 1.8% by 40 seconds, and so on. Almost immediately after the legislature adopted nitrogen hypoxia, the plaintiff attempted to reopen a dismissed as moot case challenging Louisiana's legal injection protocol. That case was dismissed a few years ago because Louisiana was and still is currently unable to obtain necessary drugs, with nitrogen now permitted under Louisiana law, however. Plaintiff filed a motion claiming that there has since been a material and extraordinary change of circumstances that gives rise to a live controversy between the parties. For the next 8 months, however, the district court took no action on the motion, and the plaintiff refused to file this lawsuit. Indeed, it was not until the plaintiff's death warrant was issued in February of 2025 that Hoffman's docket bounced back. The district court issued an order reopening the case on procedurally dubious grounds, as the Fifth Circuit in this case would later observe. The state sought relief and secured an administrative stay on the basis that this was an improper exercise of authority. Once the plaintiff realized he would be unable to use his old case as a challenge to Louisiana's new method of execution, he filed this lawsuit on February 25th and sought on February 26th to enjoin his execution. In the ensuing 2 weeks, the parties engaged in expedited discovery, motions, practice, and an evidentiary hearing on Friday, May 7th, followed by proposed findings and conclusions filed at 9 a.m. on March 9th. This case has substantially narrowed in the meantime because the district court partially granted the state's motion to dismiss certain claims from the bench in its injunctive order that the plaintiff was unlikely to succeed on certain other claims. As things stand, therefore, the only live claim presented to the Fifth Circuit is the plaintiff's Eighth Amendment challenge to nitrogen hypoxia. Here are a few key facts on that challenge. To begin, as district court recognized, both plaintiff and the state's experts agree that nitrogen hypoxia does not produce physical pain. Plaintiff's case thus depends on alleged psychological pain. To that end, he testified he is a Buddhist and engages in meditative breathing twice a day, which requires concentrated deep breaths, both inhaling and exhaling. He also testified he plans to use his breathing techniques during his execution. He put on a PTSD expert, Dr. Sauter, who agreed that the plaintiff has mastered his breathing techniques to control any PTSD issues. And so long as he can practice the breathing, he will be able to decrease his distress. Plaintiff also put on another expert, Dr. Bickler, who testified with normal breathing, and especially with deep breaths, as the plaintiff intends, unconsciousness will occur in less than 1 minute after the pure nitrogen begins to flow into the mask. Dr. Bickler also testified, at least in the assisted suicide context, allowing the free flow of a gas into the lungs but with no oxygen causes a gentle hypoxic death. His only excuse for taking the opposite position with respect to the use of nitrogen here was that it was very different context than forced asphyxiation with nitrogen in a death chamber. The state's expert agreed on the key facts. His opinion is that Louisiana's system will cause unconsciousness within 35 to 40 seconds, or perhaps sooner, once the plaintiff begins to inhale pure nitrogen, and he expects death to follow rapidly within 10 to 15 minutes. I do not believe the inmate would suffer any pain with that system, the expert said. For his part, the plaintiff proposed the firing squad and a drug cocktail known as DDMAPH as alternative methods to execution that renders nitrogen hypoxia unconstitutional. In granting the plaintiff's motion for a preliminary injunction on March 11th, the district court rejected DDMAPH because the state cannot use drugs for execution purposes, but agreed that the firing squad is a suitable alternative. On March 14th, the Fifth Circuit vacated that injunction as not just wrong, but constitutionally backwards. Specifically, the Fifth Circuit rejected the idea that the Eighth Amendment somehow requires Louisiana to use admittedly more painful methods of execution, namely execution by firing squad rather than nitrogen hypoxia. The Fifth Circuit recognized that both sides' experts testified about pain from the firing squad while agreeing that nitrogen hypoxia is physically painless. In sum, the district court didn't just get the legal analysis wrong, it turned the Constitution on its head by relying on indisputably more painful method of execution than nitrogen hypoxia. Reasonable minds can differ on the proper understanding of the Eighth Amendment, and in certain cases, but surely we can all agree that it does not require state officials to favor more painful methods of execution over less painful ones. Judge Hayne dissented on the ground that there are issues that need more time to be resolved and decided. She also believed that the majority opinion does not adequately address the facts as properly found by the district court. So that was their response, and long story short on that one, Supreme Court did not rule on the case. They actually said the state pretty much got it right, and they weren't going to hear it. So the execution was on, and it had been 15 years since Louisiana had executed someone. And as I mentioned earlier, some reporters are allowed into the chamber, and one in particular did a really fantastic job of covering from start to finish. I'm going to read that for you. It's from the Times-Picayune. It says, Jessie Hoffman's final moments inside the Louisiana execution chamber at Angola. And it goes on to read, a waft of spring flowers and low chant filled the entryway to Louisiana's execution building on Tuesday as 7 designated witnesses filed inside. The source of the chanting soon became apparent. The condemned man's spiritual advisor, dressed in a black robe, appeared through a side window as prison officials led him into the death chamber. It was 6:17 p.m. inside Camp F at the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola, where no one has been executed since 2010. Laminated signs on the walls cautioned nitrogen hypoxia system is active and pressurized. A pair of meters on the wall in the viewing room put the air at a healthy 20.7% oxygen, though it was quiet and heavy as a pair of curtains rose on Louisiana's first execution using nitrogen gas. Jessie Hoffman Jr. appeared through a picture window. He was already strapped onto the execution table and draped in a plush gray blanket. A blue industrial-grade respirator covered his face, leaving little of Hoffman to see as he lay at an incline facing the window, arms splayed in a cruciform table. Only a portion of his neck and hands were visible, thumbs touching forefingers in a sacred Buddhist pose. As Angola Warden Daryl Vinay reached for a microphone. Would you like to make a last statement, he said. Hoffman, 46, tossed his head to the side and seemed to say nothing. He also declined a last meal, a prison official later said. Vinay adjusted a valve on the mask covering Hoffman's face. The state will now carry out the execution of condemned inmate Jessie Hoffman, he said. There will be no signal for when the ultra-high-grade nitrogen called in for Louisiana's new execution protocol would begin to enter the mask and kill Hoffman. Officials said in a briefing later that it happened at 6:21 p.m. and that the gas ran for 19 minutes. Tubing led from a wall under the blanket at Hoffman's right hand. At 6:22 p.m., his breathing became uneven. His chest rose and he made a jerking motion. A minute later, Hoffman's body shook and his fingers twitched. He appeared to pull at the arms of the table, which is bolted into a ceramic tile floor in the cinder block chamber. Hoffman's hands began to clench. His head stayed turned to his right. His breathing slowed. Birds could be heard chirping under cloudless skies near dusk from a witness room, which included only the state officials and news reporters, divided by a wall. Ramoku Gregory Smith, the Buddhist spiritual advisor Hoffman chose to accompany his death, knelt on a rug a few feet away, rarely taking his eyes off of Hoffman. An oxygen monitor rested nearby on a sill. Hoffman's head remained tilted toward the room with the nitrogen tanks. At 6:26 p.m., Hoffman's head moved inside the mask. Less than a minute later, a few seconds before 6:27 p.m., he jerked slightly. It would be the last significant movement Hoffman would make in a life he had mostly spent on death row. To his left, Vinay stood in a charcoal suit and black loafers beside an anonymous prison official. Minutes passed. Hoffman's breathing slowed, then became imperceptible. On the wall behind his head, a pair of red phones installed in case of a need to communicate last-minute reprieves remained still and silent while Hoffman died under bright fluorescent light. At 6:38 p.m., Smith cast his eyes downward toward the floor as he knelt. A few minutes later, Vanoy pressed a button and the curtains descended. Rhythmic, deep chanting and popping soon could be heard from the obscured chamber, part of Hoffman's state-approved spiritual send-off. The pops and chants continued for more than 4 minutes before they wound down. When the curtains rose again at 6:52 p.m., Smith had left the room. Westcott, the corrections secretary, had entered it. Vanoy announced the execution was complete and placed the time of death at 6:50 p.m. Hoffman's face had been made visible for the first time. The mask used to kill him was now removed. His head was tilted back, teeth exposed in a grimace as the curtains slowly descended once more. Pretty descriptive. Now, in the clip I'm about to play you, the AG for Louisiana, Liz Murrill, did something I really like to see. She held a press conference and she highlighted the victim in this case as she held up a large picture and really did a good job of keeping the perspective where it needed to be, in my view, which is on the victim. And here's what that sounded like.
This was Mary Margaret Murphy Elliott. She was known to her friends as Molly. On November 28th, 1996, on Thanksgiving Day, a duck hunter found Molly Elliott's naked, dead body abandoned on a makeshift dock where she had been shot in the head execution style after being kidnapped, robbed, terrorized, raped, and marched to this desolate spot for her death. Molly was brutally and mercilessly raped and murdered. She was only 28 years old. That was nearly 30 years ago. Tonight, justice was served for Molly Elliott and for the state of Louisiana. Molly's husband told USA Today, Molly was a cherished person who missed out on motherhood, a promising and successful career, and a life in the country on the property we bought together. Hers was a life that was so full of hope and promise for a beautiful future. The loss of Molly is a scar we will forever carry, and it will never heal. Governor Landry and I made a promise to the citizens of Louisiana and the family members of the victims of these heinous crimes that we would put them first and that we would follow the law. The last execution in Louisiana was in 2010 of Gerald Bourdillon, who waived all of his final appeals. Justice has been delayed for these victims and their families for far too long. I, along with my office, remain committed to ensuring that justice is carried out in all the death penalty cases. Jessie Hoffman was convicted and sentenced to death by a jury for his heinous crimes. He received multiple appeals. He received even more appeals and review in the last several days. Now he faces his ultimate judgment before God.
At this time, we'll open it up to questions.
We'll start from the left into this way.
Can anyone, prison staff, speak to how sort of morale was affected on prison staff among prisoners in the days leading up to the execution?
Can we get more Benoit? More Benoit, go on. Come on up here.
Good evening. Our staff are professionals. Their morale was not affected. You know, I'm sure that they all have their own views, but I'm so proud of my team, my staff. Everyone was so professional. They showed Mr. Hoffman dignity and respect and did their jobs, and I am proud of them. The death row inmates, today, they were kind of quiet, but that's to be expected. I've seen that in the past, but no problems, very respectful, just kind of quiet and solemn today.
Were any members of the family in attendance?
They were not, but the governor and I have both been in contact with them, as have people from the district attorney's office in St. Tammany and the detectives who investigated this case from the outset. So they've been in close contact with the family.
Commissioner Warden, any problems that you guys, obviously this is something that's brand new to you guys, using as an execution tool. Is there anything that you ran into, any concerns, any problems with this being carried out for the very first time?
I'll tell you, my staff, as everybody knows, we followed the protocol of Alabama. Again, we let them lead the way, and we followed them. We actually probably did a little bit better than they did with some of the equipment we did, and we've made some tweaks to what they did. It was flawless. It went about as good as we can expect. We expected it to be. We had no problems. We are, like the warden said, our staff is trained for this, and it went about as flawless as we could expect it to be. There was nothing that happened that we weren't ready for.
Anyone else?
Yes, sir.
What is your message to the people outside who are there with the vigil, saying and it's not just for the inmate, but also the victim, but they're saying they want the death penalty not to be in Louisiana?
Yeah, that's a legislative policy issue, and certainly they are free to advocate and to pray and to continue to support whatever their views are. But this is the law of Louisiana, and we carried out the law of the state of Louisiana.
So you said that you and authorities have been in touch with the family of Molly Elliott, and they were not unanimously in favor of carrying out this execution. So what do you say to the family not in favor of execution in this case as well as other cases going forward? And will you hear the concerns of family members of victims who don't want to see execution?
I can tell you that Molly Elliott's immediate family members did not oppose this moving forward. They are grateful to have finality, and I was in direct communication with them during this process. So, other people might have their opinions, but I don't think it was the opinion of the immediate family members. I think they're grateful to have finality. What was frustrating for them is that it took 30 years.
In the back. So will this execution speed up the process of other inmates who are on death row?
We certainly expect to go back and look at how to make sure that we move these cases along. I've already been looking at that, looking at every case and what the status is of every case. Some of these cases have been sitting for a couple of decades with motions that the defense attorneys, frankly, should have moved forward a long time ago. We'll address those issues as we can, but yes, we expect to move more forward.
Going off of that, since you guys say this is the first successful execution in 15 years, how soon do you expect the next execution, and how many executions are you expecting to be carried out this year?
I couldn't answer that. They're at all different stages in litigation, and because this one did move forward, there have been new filings in a lot of these cases, and we just have to go sort that out in the court. So it's really impossible to say, but my staff, my team, and I really want to compliment all of the lawyers that work together with the district attorney's office in St. Tammany, with my office. Really all kind of came together because there were filings in multiple courts for the last few days. And, I think that will continue to happen, but we're going to start working our way through motions and begin to clear the underbrush and move these cases forward. Everybody deserves the justice that the state promised to them in these cases. And I think that it's important for us to be able to move them forward.
AG Murrill, you've advocated for this policy for a long time. Did you face the potential of witnessing the execution, and if so, did you wrestle with that?
I certainly had the opportunity to. I sat by a phone because somebody had to sit by the telephone. So I sat and waited by the phone in case there was something that I needed to communicate to the room. My staff was present. There were a number of people who were present, but somebody had to sit by the phone, and so I sat by the phone.
A two-part question. I know that you gave the timeline as to when the lethal gas started flowing and when he was pronounced dead. Did it actually take all 30 minutes for him to die? And also, did he exhibit any visible signs of distress while the execution was being carried out?
My chief of prison operations, Seth Smith, has a medical background, and he's the one that was in the room watching, so I'm going to turn it over to him.
Okay. To answer that, and like I said, I have a medical background.
What is your name, sir?
Seth, S-E-T-H, Smith. I've got a degree in nursing, and I practiced and had a license up until 2010, which time I let it lapse. So I was a nurse for over a decade. I've seen a lot of deaths. I was even hospice administrator for some point in time. 6:21, the gas was turned on, the nitrogen was turned on. Around 6:23, he did have some convulsive activity. And I was told he may have had even some fine motor stuff after that I personally didn't see from my angle. Nothing that I would say is consistent with pain. Nothing that I would say is inconsistent with death. When the normal dying process, people do things such as agonal respirations. They will raise up. They will do things like that. Just even somebody that's terminal illness with high doses of morphine, things like that in their system. So, he did move. He did shake very briefly. And when you asked, did it take the entire time? Our protocol calls for us to go 5 minutes after flatline. And you don't go from a normal rhythm, your heart's beating, everything's hunky-dory, to flatline. You go through various phases where you're dead. We waited till there was no electrical activity in the heart, which took, I want to say, 14 minutes, and then we went 5 minutes beyond that. So we went 19 minutes. But he, in essence, was clinically dead very quickly. Very quickly. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So following that, the governor of the state of Louisiana, Jeff Landry, he also issued a statement, though short, and here's how that read. It is unfortunate that bad people exist, and they do real bad things. When these acts of violence happen, society must not tolerate it. God is as just as he is merciful, and my hope is that when Louisiana empties death row, there will never be another victim whose perpetrator must be placed there. In Louisiana, we will always prioritize victims over criminal, law and order over lawlessness, and justice over the status quo. If you commit heinous acts of violence in this state, it will cost you your life. Plain and simple. And that from Jeff Landry. So there you have it. And now that justice has been served using this new method. And I would suspect more will be rolling out in short order. And of course, I will keep you posted on that. Thank you so much for listening. Check out the Patreon page for commercial-free early releases and more. And until next time, I'm Jim Chapman for Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making. The complete story of America's bloodiest prison. Peace.
I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hillstring gang or Angola 3.